She left a note saying she needed to find herself and vanished with $120,000 of our savings. For a year, silence. Then came the text. I've had my fun. Now I'm ready to be a wife again. I didn't reply. When she showed up at my door, she saw who answered. Her face went ghost white. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The August heat had settled into the valley by the time Stephen Harlan pulled his truck into the gravel driveway. 6 in the evening, and the sun still burned white against the Idaho sky. He killed the engine and sat there a moment, letting the silence replace the rattle of diesel. His shoulders ached from 10 hours bent over steel at the fabrication shop in Sandpoint, and his hands still smelled like metal and burn marks despite the scrubbing he'd done before clocking out. He grabbed his lunch pail from the passenger seat and stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. The house stood quiet ahead of him. A small ranch-style place they bought 5 years ago. Nothing fancy but solid. The kind of place you could raise a family in, if that day ever came. Stephen paused at the front steps. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly. Just different. The air hung too still. No music drifting from the kitchen window. No car in the driveway beside his truck. Jean usually got home from her administrative job at the medical clinic by 4:30, and she always had NPR playing while she made dinner. He climbed the steps and pushed open the front door. The house was clean. Spotless, actually. The kind of clean that happens when someone is erasing themselves. Stephen set his lunch pail on the counter and looked around the kitchen. No dishes in the sink. No coffee mug left out. The dish towel hung perfectly straight on its hook. His chest tightened. Jean. No answer. He walked through the living room, checking the bedroom, the bathroom. Everything was neat. Too neat. Her clothes still hung in the closet, but something about the arrangement looked wrong. Gaps where things used to be. Her toiletries sat on the bathroom counter, but her toothbrush was gone. So was the expensive face cream her sister had bought her for Christmas. Stephen returned to the kitchen, and that's when he saw it. A single piece of paper, folded once, sitting beside the coffee maker. His name written on the outside in her handwriting. He picked it up. The paper felt light in his hands, impossibly light for what it might contain. He unfolded it slowly. I need space. Don't look for me. That was it. 11 words. No explanation. No apology. No nothing. Stephen read it 3 times, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. His mind started racing through possibilities. A fight? They hadn't fought. Stress at work? She'd mentioned being tired, but nothing serious. Another man? The thought appeared, and he pushed it away immediately. They'd been married 9 years. You don't just walk away from 9 years. But even as he thought it, doubt crept in. He pulled out his phone and called her number. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. He hung up without leaving a message and tried again. Same result. Stephen set the phone on the counter and stared at the note. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands stayed steady. He'd learned a long time ago that panic didn't solve problems. Action did. He opened his phone again and pulled up their bank app. They had a joint checking account and a savings account. Both accounts appeared on the screen. He tapped the savings first. The number that appeared made him blink. He closed the app and opened it again, thinking it was a glitch. Balance, $47.12. That was impossible. They'd had over $120,000 in that account. Stephen had been depositing money every month for 9 years. Overtime pay, holiday bonuses, tax returns. Every spare dollar went into that account because they had a plan. They were going to buy land near Lake Pend Oreille. 10 acres with water access. Enough space to build something permanent. He checked the checking account next. Balance, $312.89. Stephen's breath came shallow now. He clicked on the transaction history for the savings account. The list loaded slowly, each line appearing like a punch to the gut. Wire transfer, $30,000 wire transfer, $25,000 wire transfer, $20,000 wire transfer, $45,000. The transfers went back 3 weeks. All of them authorized by Jean. All of them going to an account he didn't recognize. Stephen set the phone down carefully on the counter. He gripped the edge of the granite and closed his eyes. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. He thought about the missed holidays. The weekends he'd worked double shifts while other guys took their families camping. The promotion he'd turned down because it would have meant relocating, and Jean had been clear she wanted to stay close to her parents. Every choice, every sacrifice, every dollar had been building towards something, and she'd taken it all. The note sat beside his phone, mocking him with its brevity. "Don't look for me." Stephen opened his eyes and stared at the paper. His jaw clenched tight enough to ache. He picked up the note, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his wallet. Evidence. That's what the rational part of his brain called it. The rest of him just felt numb. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found his brother's number. Daniel answered on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" "Jean's gone," Stephen said. His voice came out flat, steady. "Cleaned out the bank accounts and left." Silence on the other end. "Then what? Can you come over?" "I'm leaving now." Stephen hung up and stood in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked somewhere in the living room. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went silent. He didn't cry, didn't punch the wall, didn't do anything except stand there and let the reality settle into his bones. His wife was gone. His money was gone. 9 years evaporated in the time it took to write 11 words. Daniel showed up 40 minutes later. He walked in without knocking and found Stephen sitting at the kitchen table with a beer he hadn't touched. "Tell me what happened," Daniel said. Stephen handed him the note and pulled up the bank statements on his phone. Daniel read the note once, then looked at the phone screen. His face went pale. "Jesus Christ, Stephen." "Yeah." "Have you called her?" "Went to voicemail." "Her parents?" "Not yet." Daniel sat down across from him, rubbing his face with both hands. Okay, we need to think this through. First thing, you call the bank. Report the transfers. See if you can freeze anything. Already checked. She's authorized on the accounts. The transfers are legal. Legal doesn't mean right. No, Stephen agreed. It doesn't. They sat there in silence for a moment. Daniel drummed his fingers on the table, thinking, you need a lawyer, a good one, and you need to document everything. Every transaction, every communication, everything. Stephen nodded slowly. The shock was wearing off now, replaced by something colder, something sharper. "I'll make some calls tomorrow," he said. "You want me to stay tonight?" "No, I'm fine." Daniel gave him a look that said he didn't believe that for a second, but he didn't push it. He stood up, squeezed Stephen's shoulder once, and headed for the door. "Call me if you need anything." "I mean it. I will." After Daniel left, Stephen sat alone in the kitchen as darkness settled over the house. He didn't turn on any lights, just sat there in the growing shadows, thinking about choices and consequences. The beer sat untouched in front of him, warming and going flat. The truth came in pieces over the next 2 weeks. Stephen filed a police report, though the officer who took his statement made it clear that wives transferring money from joint accounts wasn't technically theft. Marital assets, he called it. Stephen left the station feeling like he'd been punched in the throat. He hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Dawson, who'd handled his friend's divorce 3 years ago. She sat across from him in her downtown Sandpoint office and listened to everything without interrupting. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. "The money complicates things," she said, "but it's not impossible. We can argue abandonment, maybe get some of it back in the divorce settlement. But Stephen, I have to ask, did you have any idea this was coming?" He thought about that. Really thought about it. "No," he said finally. "I mean, she'd been distant the last few months. Quiet. But I figured it was work stress. Her boss had been writing her about some billing issues." Patricia made a note on her legal pad. Had she ever mentioned feeling unhappy? Wanting to leave? No. Any mention of another person? The question hung in the air. Stephen's hands tightened on the armrests of his chair. "No," he said again. But even as he said it, doubt flickered in his mind. Patricia saw it. If there's someone else, it helps our case. Think about it. If you remember anything, call me. Stephen left her office and drove home through the afternoon traffic. His mind kept circling back to the question. Another person. Was that possible? The answer came 3 days later from a place he didn't expect. He'd gone to work like usual, trying to keep his routine steady despite everything falling apart at home. During lunch break, One of the guys on his crew, a welder named Tommy Briggs, pulled him aside. "Hey, man," Tommy said, looking uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something. I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but I wasn't sure it meant anything." Stephen set down his sandwich. "What?" "About 3 weeks ago, I took my wife up to Coeur d'Alene for our anniversary. We stayed at that resort, the one right on the lake. And I saw Jean there." Something cold settled in Stephen's stomach. "When was this?" "August 12th, I think." "Yeah, it was a Saturday. We were at the hotel bar, and Jean was there with some guy. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured maybe it was a work thing, you know? But they were sitting pretty close. And he had his hand on her back." Stephen's jaw clenched. "What did he look like?" "Tall guy. Maybe 6'1". "Dark hair, fancy clothes. Looked like money, if you know what I mean." They were drinking expensive stuff. I remember because I saw the bartender pouring from a bottle that probably cost more than my truck payment. "Did she see you?" "I don't think so. We were on the other side of the bar. I told my wife to let it go. Figured it wasn't our business. But then when you said Jean left, I thought maybe I should tell you." Stephen thanked him and finished his shift on autopilot. His hands did the work while his mind spun through scenarios. 3 weeks ago. That lined up with when the first wire transfer went through. When he got home that night, he opened his laptop and went through Jean's credit card statements. They had separate cards, but he still had access to the account through the bank portal. He'd never looked before, never had a reason to. Now he did. The charges painted a picture he didn't want to see. Resort hotels in Coeur d'Alene. Restaurants he'd never heard of. A boutique clothing store. Wine bars. A spa. The amount made his hands shake. $3,000 at a jewelry store. $1,500 at some place called Azure Bistro. All of it in the 3 months before she left. All of it charged while he'd been working 60-hour weeks, thinking they were building something together. Stephen closed the laptop and sat in the dark living room. The house felt emptier now than it had when he first discovered she was gone. Because now he knew she hadn't left on impulse. She'd been planning this. Meeting someone. Spending their money on a life he wasn't part of. He called Patricia the next morning. "I found something," he said. Patricia's investigator found Dylan Cross in less than a week. The man had a pattern. He targeted women with money, usually married women who were bored or lonely or looking for excitement. He sold himself as a business consultant, though none of his supposed clients ever panned out. He lived in expensive hotels, drove leased luxury cars, and moved from woman to woman like he was shopping for his next meal. Stephen sat in Patricia's office and looked at the file. Photos of Dylan at various restaurants, hotel lobbies, golf courses. He was exactly what Tommy had described. Tall, groomed, wearing clothes that cost more than Stephen's truck. The kind of man who knew how to make women feel special, right up until their bank accounts ran dry. "He's done this before," Patricia said, sliding another document across the desk. 3 times in the last 5 years that we know of. One woman in Spokane, another in Boise, one in Kalispell. All married. All ended up divorced and broke. He's never been charged with anything because, technically, they gave him the money willingly. Stephen picked up the document and read through it. His hands stayed steady, but his heart pounded in his chest. Where is he now? Last known address was a rental condo in Coeur d'Alene, but that was 2 weeks ago. He moves around a lot. And Jean, we're still looking. But based on the pattern, she's probably with him. For now. The last 2 words hung heavy in the air. What do you mean, for now? Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. These things don't last, Stephen. He's burning through her money. Once it's gone, so is he. That's how it always goes with guys like Dylan Cross. Stephen closed the file and pushed it back across the desk. So what's our next move? We file for divorce. We document everything. The abandonment, the affair, the financial misconduct. We build a case so airtight that when this falls apart, and it will, you're protected. I want every dollar back, Stephen said quietly. I'll do everything I can, Patricia replied. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the money's gone. Even if we win a judgment, collecting from someone who's spent everything is like squeezing water from a rock. Stephen stood up. Then we make her squeeze. The months that followed were methodical. Stephen approached the situation the way he approached everything in his life, with discipline and focus. He closed the joint bank accounts and opened new ones in his name only. He gathered every financial document, every credit card statement, every receipt he could find. He changed the locks on the house and had security cameras installed. He documented everything in a spreadsheet that grew longer every day. His lawyer sent Jean divorce papers through her parents' address. She never responded. Work became his anchor. Stephen took every shift offered, welcomed the long hours and the physical exhaustion. The shop hummed with activity as they fulfilled contracts for agricultural equipment and custom metalwork. His hands moved with practiced precision, measuring and cutting and welding. The heat from the torch, the smell of burning metal, the spark of electricity, all of it required concentration that left no room for anything else. His co-workers knew better than to ask questions. They'd seen the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. Tommy Briggs brought him lunch sometimes, just set it down without a word and walked away. Small gestures that said more than conversation could. 3 months after Jean left, Stephen put the house on the market. Daniel helped him pack. They worked through the rooms in silence, boxing up 9 years of marriage. Stephen kept what he needed and donated the rest. Jean's clothes, her books, her decorative pillows, and picture frames. All of it went to Goodwill. "You sure about this?" Daniel asked as they loaded boxes into a truck. "Yeah, it's a good house. It's got too many ghosts." The house sold in 2 weeks to a young couple expecting their first baby. Stephen watched them walk through the rooms during the final showing, pointing at walls and talking about paint colors. They looked excited, hopeful. He remembered feeling that way once. He signed the papers in Patricia's office without ceremony. The profit from the sale went straight into his new savings account. It wasn't much after paying off the mortgage and covering legal fees, but it was something, a foundation to rebuild on. Stephen found a small rental near the penned Oriel River. A one-bedroom place with wood floors and a view of the water. It was quiet, simple, exactly what he needed. He bought minimal furniture, a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a couch. He hung nothing on the walls. The place felt temporary, like he was camping rather than living there. But that suited him fine. Permanent had failed him once. He wasn't ready to try it again. His brother visited every week, usually bringing takeout and staying for dinner. They'd eat and watch whatever game was on TV, talking about work and weather and anything except the obvious. Daniel never pushed, never asked if Stephen was okay or if he needed to talk. He just showed up. 6 months after Jean left, Stephen was sitting on his small porch watching the river when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Hello, Mr. Harlan. This is Detective Sharon Michaels with the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. Do you have a few minutes?" Stephen sat up straighter. "Yes. I'm calling about your wife, Jean Harlan. We've been asked to conduct a welfare check. Her parents haven't heard from her in 3 weeks, and they're concerned." "When's the last time you had contact with her?" "The day she left," Stephen said. 7 months ago." "I see. And you haven't spoken to her since?" "No. We're separated. My lawyer sent her divorce papers, but she never responded." There was a pause on the other end. "Do you know where she might be?" Stephen told the detective about Dylan Cross, about the affair, the hotels, the pattern. He gave her Patricia's contact information and suggested she talk to the investigator. "Thank you, Mr. Harlan. If she contacts you, please let us know." "I will." But the call didn't come from Jean. It came 2 days later from a hospital in Spokane. A social worker named Tracy explained that Jean had been brought in with bruises on her arms and a split lip. She'd been found at a bus station with no ID and no money. She'd given them Stephen's name as an emergency contact. "She's asking to speak with you," Tracy said. Stephen stood in his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, staring out at the river. The water moved steady and constant, indifferent to everything human. "Tell her to call her parents," he said. "Mr. Harlan, she specifically asked for you. She says she has nowhere else to go. That's not my problem anymore." He hung up before Tracy could respond. The social worker called back twice. Stephen didn't answer. He blocked the hospital number and went back to work. 2 weeks later, Patricia called. "Jean's trying to contact you," she said. "I know. She's called my office 4 times. Says she needs to talk to you about the divorce. Tell her to sign the papers." "She won't. She says she wants to work things out." Stephen laughed. It came out bitter and harsh. Work things out. I told her to go through me, but she's insisting on talking to you directly. She says it's important. Everything's important to Jean when she needs something. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What do you want me to do? Nothing. She made her choices. Now she lives with them. Spring arrived with rain that turned the valley green and filled the river to its banks. Stephen had been living in the rental for 9 months. The place still looked temporary, but he'd added a few things. A coffee maker, some dishes, a bookshelf with a handful of paperbacks he'd picked up at a thrift store. He wasn't healing exactly, but he wasn't bleeding anymore either. Work continued steady. He'd taken on some side projects, custom metalwork for local businesses. It kept him busy and added to his rebuilding savings. Slowly, painfully, he was putting the pieces back together. On a Saturday in early April, Stephen met someone. He'd gone to a community fundraiser for the local fire department. Daniel had dragged him there, insisting he needed to get out of the house. They were selling barbecue plates and had a band playing old country covers on a makeshift stage. Stephen was standing in line for food when a woman behind him spoke. They always run out of the coleslaw first. You should get extra while they still have it. He turned around. She was maybe 35, with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and green eyes that looked like they smiled a lot. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Good to know, Stephen said. Lauren, she said, holding out her hand. Stephen. Her handshake was firm, confident. They got their food and ended up sitting at the same picnic table because everywhere else was full. They talked about nothing important. The weather, the band, the best place to get coffee in Sandpoint. It was easy, uncomplicated. Stephen found himself laughing at something she said about the fire chief's terrible dancing, and realized it was the first time he'd laughed in months. When the fundraiser ended, Lauren stood up and gathered her plate. It was nice meeting you, Stephen, she said. You too. Maybe I'll see you around. Maybe. She walked away, and Stephen watched her go, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. Daniel appeared beside him, grinning. Well what? You gonna ask her out, or just stare? Stephen shook his head. I'm still married. Technically. But she left you. She stole from you. She's somewhere with another man. At what point do you get to move on? The question sat heavy between them. Stephen didn't have an answer. But 3 days later, he saw Lauren again at the coffee shop downtown. She was sitting by the window with a laptop open, working on something. Stephen ordered his coffee and was about to leave when she looked up and saw him. Stephen, right? Yeah. Lauren. Good memory. She closed her laptop. Want to sit? He hesitated, then took the chair across from her. They talked for an hour. She was a freelance graphic designer who'd moved to the area 2 years ago from Portland. She liked hiking and kayaking and complained about the lack of good sushi this far north. She asked questions that felt genuine, listened to his answers without judgment. When he mentioned he was going through a divorce, she nodded and said, That's rough. I'm sorry. No prying. No demands for details. Just simple acknowledgement. Stephen left the coffee shop with her number in his phone and a strange lightness in his chest. Over the next few months, they saw each other regularly. Coffee dates turned into dinners. Dinners turned into hikes along the river trails. Lauren asked about his work and actually seemed interested in the answers. She didn't push when he went quiet, didn't demand more than he could give. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something real, something honest. And for the first time since Jean left, Stephen thought maybe he could build something new. The divorce papers remained unsigned. Jean had gone silent again. Patricia assured him they could proceed without her cooperation, but it would take time. Stephen was fine with that. He'd learned patience. Then, one evening in late August, exactly 1 year after Jean had left, someone knocked on his door. Stephen was making dinner when he heard it. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the small house. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and walked to the door, expecting Daniel or maybe a delivery. He opened it, and there stood Lauren, which made sense because they'd made plans for dinner. But her expression stopped him cold. She looked tense, uncomfortable. Hey, she said, we have a problem. Before Stephen could ask what she meant, Jean appeared behind Lauren on the porch. She looked different, thinner. Her hair was shorter, poorly cut. She wore jeans that hung loose on her frame and a jacket that had seen better days. But her eyes were the same, wide and desperate and calculating. "Stephen," Jean said, "we need to talk." Lauren stood between them, her posture rigid. Stephen's hand tightened on the door frame. "She was waiting by your truck when I pulled up," Lauren said quietly. "I told her to leave, but she insisted." Jean's gaze flickered to Lauren, taking her in. "Who are you?" "Someone who lives here," Lauren said. The words hit Jean like cold water. Her eyes went back to Stephen, confusion mixing with something else. "Anger maybe, or fear. You moved on," Jean said, her voice rising. Already, Stephen felt the old anger stir in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "It's been a year. We're still married. You left. You emptied our accounts. You chose someone else. You don't get to show up now and act wounded." Jean's face crumpled. Real tears or fake, Stephen couldn't tell anymore. Didn't care to figure it out. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Please? Just to talk." "No. Stephen, please. I have nowhere else to go. Your parents live 20 minutes from here. They won't talk to me. Nobody will. I've lost everything." The tears came harder now. "He took everything. Dylan, I thought he loved me. I thought we had something real. But once the money ran out, he changed. He got mean. He hurt me." Lauren glanced at Stephen. He saw the question in her eyes. He shook his head slightly. "That's not my problem," Stephen said. "How can you say that?" Jean's voice went shrill. "We were married 9 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It meant everything to me, right up until you threw it away." Jean wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The tears stopped as quickly as they'd started. Stephen watched the shift happen. Watch her recalculate. "I made mistakes," she said, her tone softer now. "Controlled. I know that. I was confused and stupid, and I let Dylan manipulate me. But I'm here now. I'm asking for help. For a second chance." "No. I'm still your wife, Stephen. Legally. That house we sold, those accounts, I have rights to half of everything. If you won't help me, my lawyer will make sure I get what I'm entitled to." There it was. The real Jean underneath the tears. Stephen had wondered when she'd show herself. Lauren stepped to the side, putting herself next to Stephen rather than between them. A subtle shift that Jean noticed immediately. "You're making a mistake," Jean said, looking at Lauren. "He's not who you think he is. I think you should leave," Lauren said calmly. Jean laughed. It came out harsh and bitter. "You have no idea what you're getting into. Ask him about the things he said to me. Ask him why I left." Stephen felt Lauren's hand find his, her fingers lacing through his. "Steady. Present. I don't need to ask him anything," Lauren said. "I already know." Jean's face went red. "Fine. But this isn't over. You don't get to abandon me when I need you. I'll get a lawyer. I'll take you to court. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." Stephen met her eyes. "Do whatever you need to do." He stepped back and closed the door. Through the window, he watched Jean stand on the porch for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions. Anger, desperation, calculation. Finally, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the dusk. Lauren squeezed his hand. "You okay?" "Yeah. She's going to cause problems." "I know." They stood together in the quiet house, watching the empty porch. Stephen felt the weight of what was coming, but he also felt something else. Lauren's hand in his, solid and real. "Should I go?" Lauren asked. "Give you some space?" "No," Stephen said. "Stay." 2 days later, the police showed up. Stephen was at work when his phone rang. Sandpoint Police Department on the caller ID. He stepped away from his welding station and answered. "Mr. Harlan, this is Officer Davies. We need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about a domestic incident report filed by your wife." Stephen's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of report?" "It's better if we discuss this in person." "Can you come now?" "I'm at work. I can be there in an hour." "That's fine. Ask for me at the front desk." Stephen hung up and told his supervisor he needed to leave. Then he called Patricia. "She filed a police report," he said. "Saying what?" "I don't know yet. They want you to come in." Patricia swore softly. "Don't say anything without me there. I'll meet you at the station." The police station was a low brick building downtown, utilitarian and cold. Stephen found Patricia in the parking lot. She was dressed in a navy suit, her briefcase in hand, her expression all business. "Whatever she's claiming, stay calm," Patricia said as they walked in. "Answer only what they ask. Don't volunteer information. And if they try to separate us, refuse." Officer Davies was younger than Stephen expected, maybe 30, with short brown hair and a face that hadn't learned to hide what he was thinking yet. He led them to an interview room and gestured for them to sit. "Thanks for coming in, Mr. Harlan," Davies said, pulling out a notepad. "As I mentioned on the phone, your wife Jean Harlan filed a report yesterday alleging domestic abuse during your marriage." Stephen felt the words land like a physical blow, but he kept his face neutral. Patricia leaned forward. "What specifically is she alleging?" Davies read from his notes. "She claims there was a pattern of verbal and emotional abuse over several years. Controlling behavior. Threats. She also mentions a physical altercation that occurred approximately 2 months before she left." "That's a lie," Stephen said. Patricia put a hand on his arm. "What evidence has she provided?" "Her statement. She's given us specific dates and incidents. My client has documentation showing that Ms. Harlan abandoned him, engaged in an extramarital affair, and stole over $100,000 from their joint savings. She disappeared for a year with no contact. Now she's filed a false report in what appears to be retaliation for him refusing to help her." Davies shifted in his seat. "I'm just following protocol, ma'am. When someone files a report, we investigate." "Of course," Patricia said, "and we'll cooperate fully. But I want it on record that this is a false accusation made by someone with clear motive to discredit my client." Davies asked questions for the next 30 minutes. Where was Stephen on specific dates? Had there ever been arguments that neighbors might have overheard? Had he ever raised his voice or displayed anger toward Jean? Stephen answered each question carefully. He explained the timeline of Jean's departure, the stolen money, the affair with Dylan Cross. He mentioned that he hadn't seen or spoken to Jean until she showed up at his door 2 days ago. "And how did that encounter go?" Davies asked. "She wanted money and help. I told her no. She threatened to take me to court. Then she left." "Did you raise your voice? Make any physical contact?" "No. My girlfriend was there the whole time. She'll confirm." Davies wrote that down. "We'll need to speak with her as well." "That's fine," Stephen said. After another 20 minutes, Davies closed his notebook. "Okay, Mr. Harlan, that's all for now. We'll continue investigating and be in touch if we need anything else." "When can we expect this to be resolved?" Patricia asked. "Hard to say. Domestic cases can take time. My client's reputation is being damaged by false allegations. The faster we can clear this up, the better. We'll work as quickly as we can." Outside the station, Patricia turned to Stephen. "This is what I was afraid of. She's trying to create leverage. Will it work? Not if we handle it right. Do you have any texts or emails from during the marriage that show your relationship was normal, loving even? I can pull them." "Do that. Also, I want a full timeline of the day she claims this physical altercation happened. Where you were, who saw you, everything. If you were at work, we can get records." Stephen nodded, already running through his memory of the date Davies had mentioned. "I remember that day. I worked a full shift and then helped my brother move furniture. I was with people from 7 in the morning until almost midnight." "Perfect. Give me names and contact information. We're going to bury this so deep she'll regret ever filing it." They stood in the parking lot as traffic moved past on the street. Stephen felt exhausted suddenly, bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. "She's not going to stop," he said quietly. "No," Patricia agreed. "She won't. Not until she gets what she wants or realizes it's not going to work. But we're prepared for this. We documented everything for a reason." Stephen drove home and called Lauren. She answered on the first ring. "The police want to talk to you," he said. "I figure they might." "When?" "I'll give them your number. Just tell them what you saw the other night." "Of course." She paused. "Stephen, this is going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it?" "Yeah, probably." "Okay, then we deal with it together." That night, Stephen sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open and went through every email, every text message from the last 2 years of his marriage. He built a timeline, noted witnesses, pulled up work schedules and credit card statements that showed where he'd been on the dates Jean had mentioned in her report. The evidence was overwhelming. On the day she claimed he'd pushed her during an argument, he'd been at a work conference in Boise. 50 people had seen him there. On another date, she'd mentioned he'd been helping at a charity event with his brother, with photos to prove it. Jean's story was full of holes. But Stephen knew that didn't matter. Not really. The accusation alone did damage. People would hear about it. They'd wonder. Even if he proved everything false, the stain would remain. His phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Heard about the police visit. You okay? Yeah. Working through it. Need anything? Not right now. Thanks. Call if you do. Stephen set the phone aside and went back to his timeline. He worked until after midnight, double-checking every detail, making sure nothing was missed. When he finally closed the laptop, he sat in the dark kitchen and thought about Jean, about how she'd looked on his porch 2 nights ago, desperate and calculating, willing to destroy him if it meant getting what she wanted. He felt anger, but underneath it, something colder, something that had been building for a year. Resolve. She wanted a war. Fine. He'd give her one, but he'd win it with facts, not emotions. With patience, not rage. And when it was over, she'd understand what it meant to underestimate someone. The investigation moved slowly. Officer Davies interviewed Lauren, who told him exactly what she'd witnessed. He spoke with Stephen's co-workers, his brother, his former neighbors from the old house. Every conversation came back clean. Meanwhile, Jean escalated. She called Stephen's work and spoke with his supervisor, claiming he'd been violent during their marriage. The supervisor, a man named Frank who'd known Stephen for 8 years, called him into the office afterward. I got a strange phone call, Frank said, leaning back in his chair. Your ex-wife. Separated, Stephen corrected. Not ex yet. And yet, probably. She said some things. I figured you'd want to know. What kind of things? Accusations. About violence, anger issues. I told her I'd worked with you for 8 years and never seen anything like that. But she was persistent. Wanted me to fire you. Stephen felt his jaw tighten. I'm sorry she dragged you into this. Don't be. I've seen enough divorces to know how ugly they get. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case she tries anything else. Frank leaned forward. For what it's worth, I don't believe a word of it. You're one of the most level-headed guys we've got. Thanks, Frank. You need time off to deal with this, you let me know. I'd rather work. Frank nodded. I get that. Stephen returned to his station, but word had spread. He could feel the eyes on him, the whispered conversations that stopped when he walked by. Most of his co-workers probably believed him, but some didn't. And that doubt, that question mark, hung over everything. A week later, Jean filed for divorce herself. The papers came through Patricia's office with demands that made Stephen's blood pressure spike. She wanted half of everything. The profit from the house sale, half his retirement account, alimony. She claimed he'd hidden assets and demanded full financial disclosure. Patricia called him into her office to go through it. She's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, Patricia said. None of this will hold up in court, but it shows her strategy. She's going to fight for every penny. What about the money she stole? We're demanding full repayment plus interest in our counterfiling. We're also including evidence of her affair, the abandonment, and the false police report. This is going to get messy, Stephen. I don't care. I want every dollar back. I'm going to be honest with you. Even if we win a judgment for the full amount, collecting it might be impossible. She has no assets, no job, no way to pay. Then she can figure it out. Patricia studied him for a moment. You're angry. That's understandable. But I need you to think about what you really want here. Do you want money? Or do you want to make her pay? Both. Fair enough. Then we go to trial. But it's going to cost you. Legal fees will add up fast. I'll pay whatever it takes. Over the next few months, the legal battle intensified. Depositions were scheduled and canceled. Jean claimed she couldn't afford a lawyer and demanded the court provide one. She filed motion after motion, each one more desperate than the last. Through it all, Stephen maintained his routine. Work during the day, evenings with Lauren, weekends on the river. He refused to let Jean's chaos consume him. Lauren proved steady. She didn't flinch when Jean showed up at her apartment one night, screaming accusations. She calmly called the police and watched from her window as Jean was escorted away. She didn't ask Stephen to choose between fighting Jean and building something new with her. She just stayed. In December, 3 months after Jean filed for divorce, Officer Davies called. Mr. Harlan, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've completed our review and determined that Ms. Harlan's allegations lack credible support. The case is being closed without charges. Stephen felt something release in his chest. Thank you. I'm sorry this took so long. These cases are sensitive and we have to be thorough. I understand. You should know that we've advised Ms. Harlan that filing false reports is a crime. If she continues making allegations she can't support, she could face charges herself. After he hung up, Stephen called Patricia and told her the news. Good, she said. Now we can use that in court. False accusation of domestic violence shows malicious intent. It strengthens our case significantly. The trial date was set for late February. Winter settled over northern Idaho with heavy snow and bitter cold. Stephen spent Christmas with Daniel and his family, helped Lauren move into a larger apartment downtown, and prepared for what was coming. Patricia had assembled a case file that was 3 inches thick. Every financial transaction, every text message, every piece of evidence that showed Jean's affair, theft, and abandonment. She'd tracked down 2 of Dylan Cross's previous victims who were willing to testify about his pattern of behavior. She'd gathered statements from Stephen's co-workers, his neighbors, his friends, all painting a picture of a man who'd been wronged. Jean, meanwhile, had burned through 2 court-appointed attorneys. Both had withdrawn from her case, citing irreconcilable differences. By the time the trial date arrived, she was representing herself. The courtroom was small and sterile, wood paneling and fluorescent lights. Stephen sat next to Patricia, wearing his only suit. Across the aisle, Jean sat alone, papers spread in front of her in disorganized piles. She looked worse than she had on his porch months ago. Thinner, older. Her hair hung limp around her face, and her clothes looked like thrift store finds. But her eyes still had that calculating edge. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Judge Maria Hensley was in her 50s, with silver hair and a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. She looked at the case file, then at Jean. Ms. Harlan, you're representing yourself? Yes, Your Honor. You understand that's not advisable? I can't afford an attorney. The court has provided you with legal representation twice. Both attorneys withdrew. That's concerning. Jean's face flushed. They didn't understand my case. Or they understood it better than you'd like. Judge Hensley opened the file. Let's proceed. Ms. Dawson, you're representing the petitioner? Patricia stood. Yes, Your Honor. We're seeking dissolution of marriage based on abandonment, adultery, and financial misconduct. We're also seeking restitution for the funds Ms. Harlan unlawfully transferred from joint accounts. How much are we talking about? $123,000, Your Honor. Judge Hensley looked at Jean. Ms. Harlan, you transferred that amount from joint accounts. They were joint accounts. I had legal access. Legal access doesn't mean proper use. We'll get to that. Ms. Dawson, present your case. What followed was 4 hours of testimony and evidence. Patricia walked through the timeline methodically, starting with the day Stephen came home to find Jean gone. She showed the note, the bank transfers, the credit card statements for expensive hotels and restaurants. She called Tommy Briggs to the stand. He testified about seeing Jean at the resort with Dylan Cross. Patricia showed photos from the investigator showing Jean and Dylan together at multiple locations. She called the hospital social worker who'd contacted Stephen when Jean was found in Spokane. She called Detective Michaels who'd confirmed Jean's disappearance report from her parents. Jean tried to object repeatedly, but Judge Hensley cut her off. Ms. Harlan, you'll have your chance to present your case. Right now, I'm listening to testimony. Patricia's final witness was Stephen. He took the stand and told his story simply. The shock of finding Jean gone, the stolen money, the year of silence, her return demanding help and money, the false police report. Jean stared at him the entire time, her face cycling through emotions. Stephen didn't look at her. He looked at the judge and told the truth. When Patricia finished, Judge Hensley turned to Jean. Your turn to present evidence. Jean stood and approached the bench with her stack of papers. She talked for 30 minutes straight, her story changing direction every few sentences. She claimed she'd been emotionally abused, that Stephen had controlled their finances, that she'd been trapped and Dylan had helped her escape. When Judge Hensley asked for evidence, Jean produced nothing. Where are the records showing your husband controlled the finances? The judge asked. He had all the passwords. The evidence shows you had equal access to all accounts until you transferred the money. That's because he made me give it to myself. He threatened me. When? I don't remember exactly. It happened over time. You're claiming he forced you to steal your own money? It wasn't stealing. It was mine too. Judge Hensley sat back. Ms. Harlan, do you have any witnesses? Anyone who can corroborate your version of events? My parents know what he was like. Are they here? No. They're angry with me right now. But they'll tell you. But they're not here. Do you have any evidence of abuse? Medical records, police reports from during the marriage, counseling records. Jean's face went red. I never reported it because I was scared. But you reported it after you left. After he refused to give you money. That's interesting timing. That's when I felt safe enough to tell the truth. Judge Hensley looked at the case file, then at Patricia, then back at Jean. Ms. Harlan, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen a lot of cases, and I've seen a lot of people try to rewrite history when things don't go their way. She leaned forward. The evidence here is overwhelming. You had an affair. You transferred significant funds from joint accounts while planning your departure. You abandoned your husband without communication for over a year. When you returned and he refused to help you, you filed a false police report. I'm not finished. You've provided no credible evidence to support your claims of abuse. No witnesses, no documentation, nothing but your word. And your word has been proven unreliable. The police investigated your domestic violence claim and found it false. Jean's hands gripped the table. You're going to believe him over me? Because he has money for a better lawyer? I'm going to believe the evidence, Ms. Harlan. And the evidence shows you're not being truthful. Judge Hensley wrote something in her notes, then looked up. Here's my ruling. The marriage is dissolved. Mr. Harlan is granted full divorce on grounds of adultery and abandonment. Ms. Harlan is ordered to repay the $123,000 she transferred from joint accounts, plus interest, for a total of $131,000. She has 60 days to begin payments. Jean's face went white. I can't pay that. I don't have any money. Then you'll need to find employment. The court will set up a payment plan. This isn't fair. He gets everything and I get nothing. You got $123,000, Ms. Harlan. What you did with it is your responsibility, not his. Judge Hensley looked at Patricia. Is there anything else? Patricia stood. Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to pursue criminal charges for the false police report and potential fraud charges for the theft. Jean shot to her feet. You can't do this. Sit down, Ms. Harlan, Judge Hensley said sharply. Ms. Dawson, that's a matter for the district attorney's office. But based on what I've seen here today, I'd say they'd have a strong case. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Stephen stood as the judge left. Across the aisle, Jean was crying, her papers scattered across the table. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. You're destroying me, she said. Stephen met her gaze steadily. No, you did that yourself. He walked out of the courtroom with Patricia, leaving Jean alone with the consequences of her choices. The district attorney's office moved faster than Stephen expected. 2 weeks after the divorce trial, Jean was charged with filing a false police report and theft by deception. The charges carried potential jail time, though Assistant District Attorney Michael Ross told Stephen not to expect much. First offense, probably looking at probation and restitution, Ross said. They were sitting in his office downtown, case files spread across his desk. But it sent a message. People can't weaponize the police system for personal vendettas. What if she can't pay the restitution? Stephen asked. Then she violates probation and faces jail time. But that's down the road. Right now, we focus on the trial. The criminal trial was scheduled for late April. Stephen prepared himself for another round of courtroom drama, but Patricia assured him this one would be different. Criminal cases have a higher burden of proof, she explained. But we've already established the facts in civil court. The DA just has to prove intent, and we have plenty of evidence for that. Stephen tried to return to normal life. He picked up extra shifts at work, helped Lauren paint her new apartment, spent weekends fishing with Daniel. But Jean's presence lingered like smoke. She'd call from block numbers, hang up when he answered. She'd show up at places she knew he'd be, always at a distance, always watching. Lauren wanted to get a restraining order, but Patricia advised against it. It'll look like provocation, she said. Let her do what she's doing. Document it. If she actually approaches or threatens, then we act. So Stephen documented. Photos of her car parked outside his work. Screenshots of missed calls from blocked numbers. Statements from Lauren about Jean following her to the grocery store. The evidence pile grew. In early March, something shifted. Stephen was having coffee with Lauren when his phone rang. Detective Michaels from the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. Mr. Harlan, I wanted to give you a courtesy call. Dylan Cross was arrested in Missoula yesterday. Stephen sat up straighter. For what? Fraud, identity theft, and assault. He apparently moved on to another victim after your wife. This time he stole her identity and opened credit cards in her name. When she confronted him, he put her in the hospital. Is she okay? She will be, but she's cooperating with authorities. And here's the interesting part. She's willing to testify about Dylan's pattern of behavior, including his relationship with your wife. Stephen processed that. Why would she testify about Jean? Because apparently Jean knew what Dylan was doing. She helped him target this woman, introduced them, vouched for him. The victim has text messages to prove it. Lauren was watching Stephen's face. He met her eyes as Detective Michaels continued. The DA might want to bring charges against your wife as an accomplice. I can't say for sure, but I thought you should know. Thanks for the heads up. After he hung up, Lauren reached across the table and took his hand. What happened? Stephen told her. When he finished, she sat back in her chair. So she went from victim to accomplice. Looks that way. How do you feel about that? It was a good question. Stephen thought about it while his coffee cooled in front of him. How do you feel? Not satisfied exactly. Not vindicated. Just tired. I feel like she made choices, he said finally. And now she's living with them. No part of you feels bad for her. Should I? Lauren shrugged. I don't know. She's going to prison, Stephen. Her life is basically over. She did that. Not me. I know. I'm just asking if you feel anything about it. Stephen looked out the window at the street beyond. People walked by in the spring sunshine, living their lives, unaware of the drama playing out in a coffee shop booth. I feel done, he said. That's all. Just done. The criminal trial happened in late April as scheduled, but it was anticlimactic. Jean showed up with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They offered a plea deal within the first hour. Guilty to filing a false report, lesser charges dropped. 90 days in county jail, 3 years probation, full restitution. Jean took it. Judge Hensley accepted the plea and set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Stephen attended because Patricia said it was important to show the victim's presence, but he didn't testify. He just sat in the back of the courtroom and watched Jean stand before the judge. She lost more weight. Her clothes hung on her frame, and her hands shook when she spoke. The public defender tried to make a case for leniency, talked about Jean being manipulated by Dylan, about her losing everything, about her being remorseful. Judge Hensley listened without expression. Ms. Harlan, you've caused significant harm, she said when the defense finished. You falsely accused your husband of domestic violence, which could have destroyed his life and livelihood. You stole over $100,000. And now I'm hearing you may have been involved in criminal activity with Mr. Cross. I didn't know what he was doing, Jean said, her voice barely audible. That's for another court to decide. Today, I'm sentencing you on the charges you've pled guilty to. 90 days in county jail, starting immediately. 3 years supervised probation upon release. Full restitution of $131,000 to Mr. Harlan. Payments to begin within 30 days of your release. Jean's shoulders shook. I can't pay that. Then you'll find a way. Because if you don't, you'll be back in front of me for violation of probation. And next time, I won't be as lenient. The bailiff led Jean away. She looked back once as she reached the door, her eyes finding Stephen in the back row. He didn't look away, didn't nod, just watch her disappear through the door. Outside the courthouse, Patricia waited for him. It's over, she said. For now, the Missoula charges will probably take months to resolve. But that's not your problem anymore. Unless they need me to testify. Even then, you just tell the truth and walk away. The hard part's done, Stephen. He nodded, but didn't feel the sense of closure he'd expected. Maybe because it wasn't really over. Jean would be out in 90 days. She'd be on probation for years. She'd owe him money she'd probably never pay. The consequences would echo for a long time. But at least they'd be her consequences, not his. Stephen drove home along the river road, windows down, spring air pouring in. The water ran high with snowmelt, fast and cold and indifferent. He thought about the last year and a half. The shock of Jean leaving. The theft. The year of rebuilding. Lauren. The police report. The trials. All of it felt distant now, like it had happened to someone else. When he pulled up to his rental, Lauren's car was already there. She sat on the front steps, 2 coffee cups beside her. "Thought you might want company," she said when he walked up. "Always." They sat together on the steps, drinking coffee and watching the river. After a while, Lauren spoke. "What happens now?" "I don't know. Keep working. Keep living. Keep us." Stephen looked at her. She met his gaze steadily, no uncertainty in her eyes. "Yeah," he said. "Keep us." She smiled. "Good." Summer arrived, and with it, changes. Stephen's landlord decided to sell the rental property. Rather than look for another place, Stephen and Lauren found a house together. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom with a yard and a view of the mountains. They moved in over a weekend with help from Daniel and a few friends from work. Jean served her 90 days and was released on probation. Stephen heard about it through Patricia, who heard it from the DA's office. Jean had started working at a fast food restaurant and was making minimum monthly payments on the restitution, $25 a month. At that rate, it would take 400 years to pay him back. Stephen didn't care. He'd written off the money as the price of freedom. The Missoula charges took longer to resolve. Dylan Cross eventually pled guilty to fraud and assault and got 5 years in state prison. The victim he'd targeted dropped charges against Jean in exchange for her testimony against Dylan. Jean walked away with probation but had to wear an ankle monitor for a year. Stephen learned all this secondhand. He never contacted Jean, never asked about her, never looked back. She'd become a story he told when someone asked about his first marriage. A cautionary tale about trust and consequences. Life moved forward. In August, exactly 2 years after Jean had left, Stephen married Lauren on the banks of the pinned Oriole River. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Dana was best man. Patricia attended and brought her husband. Even Frank from the welding shop showed up. They exchanged vows under a clear blue sky with the sound of water moving over rocks in the background. When a minister pronounced them husband and wife, Stephen kissed Lauren and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real and uncomplicated. The reception was a barbecue in their backyard. People ate and drank and told stories. As the sun set, Stephen found himself standing at the edge of the yard with Daniel, looking out at the river. "You did good, little brother," Daniel said, clinking his beer bottle against Stephen's. "Thanks for sticking around. Where else would I be?" They stood in comfortable silence. Then Daniel spoke again. "You ever think about her?" Stephen knew who he meant. "Sometimes. Not as much as I used to." "You forgive her?" It was a question people had asked him a lot lately. At first, he'd given the expected answer, no, and he never would. But lately, the answer had become more complicated. "I don't think about it in terms of forgiveness," Stephen said slowly. "I think about it as accepting what happened and moving on. She made choices. Those choices had consequences. I'm not carrying anger around anymore, but I'm also not pretending it didn't hurt. That's probably healthier than forgiveness anyway," Daniel said. "Maybe." Lauren appeared beside them, slipping her hand into Stephen's. "Hey, people are asking about cake." "Then let's have cake," Stephen said. They walked back toward the house together, leaving the river behind. The party continued into the evening, people laughing and dancing to music someone had set up on portable speakers. Stephen stood with Lauren, swaying to a slow song, and let himself be present in the moment. No ghosts, no what-ifs, just this. Later, after everyone had left and they were cleaning up, Lauren found Stephen standing on the back deck. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking. About how different things are now from 2 years ago." about how I didn't think I'd ever get here. Lauren wrapped her arms around him from behind. But you did. We did. They stood together under the stars, the river a dark ribbon in the distance. Somewhere out there, Jean was living with her choices. Dylan was in prison. The money was gone. The marriage was over. But Stephen was here, married to someone who chose him every day, building something new on ground that had been burned clear. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but maybe it was the one he needed. Fall came, and with it, routine. Stephen continued working at the fabrication shop, though he'd turned down overtime in favor of evenings at home. Lauren's design business grew steady, enough that she rented a small office space downtown. They had dinner together most nights, took walks along the river, made plans for the future. Small plans at first. A trip to Glacier National Park, Thanksgiving with both their families, painting the bedroom a color they both actually liked. Then bigger plans. Maybe buying their own land eventually. Maybe building a house. Maybe someday kids. Everything Jean had taken, Stephen was rebuilding differently. Better. In October, Patricia called with news. Jean violated her probation, she said. Failed to make restitution payments 3 months in a row. Judge Hensley issued a warrant. What happens now? They'll pick her up, bring her back before the judge. She'll probably get more jail time. Stephen sat with that information. A year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, he would have felt satisfied. Victory. Justice. But now he just felt tired. Okay, he said. That's it? Just okay. What else is there to say? She made choices, Patricia. This is what happens. I know. I just thought you'd want to know. I appreciate it. But I don't need updates anymore. Whatever happens to Jean, it's not my problem. There was a pause on Patricia's end. Fair enough. I'll close the file then. Thank you. For everything. You're welcome, Stephen. Take care of yourself. After he hung up, Stephen sat on the back deck with a cup of coffee and watched the morning light spread across the mountains. Jean would go back to jail. She'd get out eventually and probably violate probation again. The cycle would continue until she figured out how to change, or it would continue until it broke her completely. Either way, it wasn't his story anymore. He finished his coffee and went inside. Lauren was making breakfast, humming along to something on a radio. She smiled when she saw him. You're up early, she said. Couldn't sleep. Everything okay? Yeah, everything's good. And it was not perfect, not without scars, but good enough. That afternoon, Stephen drove out to the land they'd been looking at. 10 acres near Lake Pendorile with a view of the Cabinet Mountains. It wasn't the exact spot he and Jean had planned for, but it was close. Close enough that he could stand there and see the future instead of the past. Lauren met him there after work. They walked the property line, talking about where they'd put a house if they bought it, where the driveway would go, how they'd preserve the big ponderosa pines near the water. You're serious about this? Lauren asked. Yeah. Are you? Hell yes. But Stephen, this is going to cost everything we've saved. Are you sure you're ready? He thought about the money Jean had stolen. The $120,000 that had represented years of work and sacrifice. That money was gone. He'd probably never see most of it again. But standing here on this land with Lauren, he realized something. Jean hadn't stolen his future. She'd stolen money. Money could be earned again. Time could create new opportunities. What she couldn't take was his ability to start over. I'm ready, he said. They made an offer the next week. Winter arrived early that year, snow falling before Thanksgiving and piling deep across the valley. Stephen and Lauren moved through the holidays with quiet contentment. They hosted his family for Christmas, spent New Year's Eve at home with movies and wine. In January, they closed on the land. Stephen stood at the edge of the property on a cold morning, watching his breath fog in the air. The lake stretched out before him, frozen at the edges but still moving in the center. Mountains rose in the distance, white-capped and ancient. This was it, the foundation, the fresh start. Lauren came to stand beside him, wrapped in a thick coat. What are you thinking? That I'm glad Jean left. The words surprised them both. Lauren turned to look at him. Really? Yeah. I mean, I wish she'd done it differently. I wish she hadn't stolen the money or lied or tried to destroy me. But if she hadn't left, I'd still be in that marriage. Comfortable maybe, but not happy. Not really. And now I'm here with you. Building something that's actually mine. Ours. He looked at her. She did me a favor by showing me who she really was. It hurt like hell at the time, but I'm better for it. Lauren smiled. That's very evolved of you. Don't give me too much credit. I'm still pissed about the money. She laughed and leaned into him. They stood together in the cold, looking out at water and mountains and endless sky. We should start planning the house, Lauren said after a while. Spring, spring. They walked back to the truck hand in hand, leaving footprints in the fresh snow. Behind them, the land waited. Patient, ready. Jean got out of jail in March. Stephen only knew because he ran into her at a gas station near Sandpoint. He was filling up his truck when he saw her getting out of an old sedan across the pumps. She looked different again. Not thin anymore, but heavy, like stress had settled into her body and made a home there. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore clothes that had seen too many washes. Their eyes met across the concrete. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jean walked toward him. Stephen's hand tightened on a gas nozzle, but he didn't run, didn't leave, just waited. She stopped a few feet away. Stephen, Jean, I heard you got married. I did. And bought land. Yeah. She looked down at her shoes. They were falling apart, duct tape holding one sole together. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For everything. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need to say it. I was stupid and selfish, and I ruined both our lives. Stephen watched her carefully, looking for the angles, the manipulation. But all he saw was exhaustion. You didn't ruin my life, he said. You derailed it for a while. But I'm fine now. I'm not. Her voice cracked. I'm barely surviving. I owe you money I'll never be able to pay. I got a record. No real job prospects. And Dylan's in prison, so I can't even. She trailed off. Can't even what? Nothing. Forget it. They stood in silence. Around them, traffic moved past on the highway. Normal people doing normal things. I should go, Jean said finally. Yeah. She turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're happy. You deserve it. Stephen watched her walk back to her car. She moved like someone who'd been beaten down by life, shoulders hunched, steps heavy. Part of him felt sorry for her. A small part. The rest of him just felt nothing. She pulled out of the gas station and disappeared into traffic. Stephen finished filling his tank, paid inside, and drove home. When he walked in the door, Lauren was at the kitchen table with blueprints spread in front of her. Hey, she said, looking up. I've been working on the layout. Come see. He crossed the room and looked at what she'd drawn. A simple house with 3 bedrooms, open living space, windows facing the lake. Exactly what they talked about. It's perfect, he said. You think? Yeah. He kissed the top of her head. Let's build it. They broke ground in May. The construction crew arrived on a Monday morning with heavy equipment and loud voices. Stephen took the day off work to be there, watched them clear the building pad, and mark the foundation lines. By summer, the house had walls. By fall, it had a roof. Stephen spent weekends working alongside the contractors, doing what he could to keep costs down. Lauren painted and stained and made 1,000 small decisions about fixtures and finishes. In November, exactly 3 years after Jean had left, they moved in. The house still smelled like fresh paint and new wood. They didn't have enough furniture to fill all the rooms yet, and the walls were mostly bare. But it was theirs, built on their terms, paid for with money they'd earned honestly. On their first night in the house, Stephen stood in the kitchen while Lauren unpacked boxes. Through the window, he could see the lake reflecting the last light of day. What do you think? Lauren asked, coming to stand beside him. I think we did it. Yeah, we did. She slipped her hand into his, and they stood together, watching darkness settle over the water. Somewhere in the house, a box shifted and settled. The foundation creaked as it adjusted to new weight. Normal sounds of a house becoming a home. No regrets? Lauren asked. Stephen thought about the question. About Jean and the stolen money and the 2 years of chaos and pain. About the divorce and the trials and the ugly aftermath. No, he said finally. No regrets. Because regret implied wishing things had been different. And if things had been different, he wouldn't be here. In this house. With this woman. Building this life. Jean had taught him something valuable, though she'd never meant to. She'd taught him that you can't control other people's choices. You can only control your response to them. You can let betrayal break you, or you can use it as fuel to build something better. Stephen had chosen the latter. I'm going to start dinner, Lauren said, moving toward the stove. I'll help. They cooked together in their new kitchen, moving around each other with practiced ease. Later, they ate at the folding table they'd set up in the dining room, making plans for what came next. New furniture, landscaping, maybe a dog. Small dreams that felt enormous. After dinner, Stephen stepped out onto the back deck. The night was cold, stars sharp overhead. He could hear the lake moving against the shore, a rhythm as old as the land itself. He thought about Jean briefly, wonder where she was, if she'd found any peace, if she ever would. Then he let the thought drift away like smoke. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. Jean had made that mistake with him. She'd thought his patience meant she could take whatever she wanted, that his quiet nature meant he wouldn't fight back. She'd been wrong, but Stephen hadn't fought back with anger or revenge. He'd fought back with discipline, with facts, with the patience to let truth and consequences do their work. And in the end, that had been more devastating than any rage could have been. The door opened behind him, and Lauren appeared with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. It's freezing out here, she said, handing him one. Yeah. You coming in? In a minute. She kissed his cheek and went back inside, leaving him alone with the night. Stephen sipped the hot chocolate and looked out at his land, his house, his life. It had taken 3 years to get here. 3 years of hard work and legal battles and rebuilding from nothing. But he'd made it, not by forgiving Jean or letting go of what she'd done, but by accepting it as part of his story and refusing to let it be the end of his story. Some mistakes can't be undone with tears. Some karma doesn't scream. It closes doors quietly and locks them. Jean's door was closed now. Locked. Sealed. And Stephen had built himself a new house with better foundations and stronger walls. He finished his hot chocolate and went inside. Lauren was in the living room, curled up on their second-hand couch with a book. She looked up when he entered. You good? She asked. Yeah, Stephen said, settling beside her. I'm good. And for the first time in 3 years, he meant it completely.